The following is an extract from a short story called Hope's Children in the In Harm's Way anthology. The shuttle went down on the outskirts of Hidden Valley near Centretown. Damn, we can't send men in there. It's Vest territory. There's scanners all over the area. Then, regret mixed with resignation, it has to be the kids. The voices faded in and out, then the blackness engulfed Cassie again. When she finally came to and opened her eyes, she found she was curled in a ball at the heart of a dense bush. With patience born of experience, she listened carefully for the sounds of woodland critters, bird calls, the rasping of crickets, but all was well. There was no one nearby. Pulling herself to her knees, she pushed her way through the thorns-free centre and into the spiky outer branches, using her pack to keep the sharp thorns at bay. Cursing under her breath, she rubbed her scratched hands. No time for that, she thought as she grabbed up her pack and got to her feet. Time to get to the village. A faint breeze sent puffs of dust up into the air as she walked. Ahead, the outskirts of the village rose through the already gathering heat haze. Autumn on Hope was always hot. She trudged along, sweat forming on her brow, plastering her hair uncomfortably to the back of her neck. As she got nearer, she saw a watchtower with one of the Vests looking out towards her. The Vessian sensor panels ringing the village were between her and the entrance. Would they still let her past, or would they zap her as too mature? Her heart in her mouth, she strode between them. A faint tingle buzzed through her, and she was out of range and heading towards the entrance. One obstacle down, one more to go. A group of 4 Vests were now standing at the village gate, along with the obligatory human translator. "Halt, what brings you to our village?" the human asked, stepping forward. "Cassie Stringer, returning to join her group," she said, faking more tiredness than she actually felt. "What's the problem?" "They want to know what your business is here." "I live here. I'm coming home. What's it to you?" The man glanced sideways at the group, talking to them in their guttural language, then waited for a reply. Cassie stared at the nearest Vest, making the other blink its large eyes and look away. Tall as the average human, their skin was pallid, the nose 2 mere spots in the face above the small mouth. If she looked hard, she could see a faint pattern of scales on the skin. She didn't bother today. She just wanted this confrontation to be over. "They wish to know why you left," the human said. "I went to visit friends in Barford. There's nothing wrong with that, is there?" "You should remain in the village of your birth. The Vests don't encourage travel, you know that." "We're the only ones who can travel," she snapped back at him. "I'm home now. You going to let me in or what?" she asked, putting a petulant belligerence in her tone. "I swear you make more of a fuss than they do." "Let me see the bag." The interpreter held out his hand for her pack. "Got to check it for contraband." She handed it over, and he rifled through the contents before handing it back to her. "Someone was generous with food," he said. She shrugged. They had extra. Since the 2 species had different dietary needs, the villagers in work camps survived on food airdropped by the humans at war with the Vests. But every now and then the military would include a batch of MREs for the villages. The kids, working as couriers like Cassie and her small group, knew to save the meals to use on their missions. It meant a few days of poor rations until other food drops took up the slack, but they could handle that. "Arms up for a pat-down. Can't let you bring in any weapons." This was her main worry. Spread about the many pockets in the lining of her old padded coat were the supplies she'd need for her mission. Contraband in the eyes of the Vests and the human collaborators, but necessary to her. She stood with her arms held out as the interpreter began to frisk her. The nearest Vest grabbed him by the shoulder and pulled him back, barking an order at him. The interpreter scowled and began to argue. The guard backhanded him, making him stagger and spit blood. He straightened up and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "He says don't go out again or you may not be allowed back in. They're beginning to crack down on who gets out and you to look near the age limit." "Bite me," she muttered under her breath, annoyed at the interchange, even though she had expected it. She knew what the Vest had said, and it wasn't that. A sudden blinding pain behind her eyes caused her to stagger slightly. A hand reached out to steady her, but she pulled away from the interpreter even as she heard the voice in her head. "She has to understand the Vest. We haven't time for compassion." Then it was gone, and she was righting herself and setting off down the main road. "You all right, kid?" The voice of the interpreter followed her. "Yeah, fine," she said, rubbing a hand across her eyes. Damn it, the sleep memories weren't integrating properly. How much longer would it take until they did? The village was a collection of buildings, most broken in some way, be it gaping windows or doors or roofs that no longer kept out the winter rains. As she paced between the ruins, she sensed young faces peering at her through broken panes of glass, or the few dirty intact ones, following her movements with suspicion. Of the few adults she knew living there was no sign. They knew better than to show their faces when the vests were about. She left the dusty road and stepped up onto the boardwalk, heading for one of the larger and better preserved buildings. It looked as dilapidated as it had when she'd left a couple of months ago. The blue paint faded, and the white now the colour of the ever-present grey dust. It looked deserted. "Where are you?" she muttered, eyes darting around as she stopped at the door. Were they still there? The door suddenly opened, and there stood Jemmy, her fine features creased into a smile. "I knew you'd be back," she said happily, darting forward to hug her. Behind Jemmy, in the dim light of the main room, the others stood awkwardly, waiting for her to enter. She laughed, tucking the scruffy flyway ends of Jemmy's hair behind her ears. "Yes, I'm back," she said, linking her arms through the younger girls and stepping into the house. "Why was you gone?" Matt demanded as she shut the door behind her. "Had to go outside," she said, "but I'm back now." She glanced round the main room. Nothing had changed except it looked even shabbier than before. "We got a job," Les said. It wasn't a question. Cassie waited a minute before answering him, looking at the kids one by one, gauging their mood, searching for the slightest sign that something was not as it should be. "Yeah," she said, moving further into the room. "Some ranker's been shot down 5 miles or so from here. Needs us to go save his sorry ass. They want him back. Seems he's got information can help the war effort." "This ain't a war," Les said, gathering up the throwing knives he'd been sharpening. "It's a rout. We got nothing to fight back with." "Intel is what'll help us win. This ranker has more of it," she said, throwing her back onto a sagging easy chair. "Intel didn't stop him getting shot down," Les muttered, going over to the rough table and pulling out a dining chair to sit on. "There's food in my pack," she said. "Who's on kitchen duty?" "Me and Jemmy," Matt said, walking over to her. "What you got?" He picked up the pack and hefted it. "It's heavy." "Take it and see," she said, sparing a moment for a quick grin, no matter that it was forced. "Bread and tins of beans, some chicken and tuna, and 6 packs of those potatoes you add hot water to. Some MREs too." "We'll eat well tonight," Jemmy said as Matt picked up the pack and headed for the kitchen door. "Where'd you go?" asked Pete. "I needed to go for special training," she said, taking off her coat and sitting down in the empty easy chair. "Why do you need special training?" Jemmy asked, perching on the arm of the chair. "Dunno," she said. "They said do it, so I did." "Was it sleep training?" Pete asked, who'd had a session or two of that himself. "Sleep training's the easiest," Matt said, coming back in from the kitchen with a roll of cookies from her bag. "You get all plugged up, then you go to sleep and suddenly it's morning. Then they get you to practice what you just learned." Most of the kids had been outside the village with her at some time to get specialised resistance training. On this world, only they could move freely and were above suspicion because of the Vess's belief in the sanctity and innocence of childhood. "Some was. Most of their language this time, and some other stuff," she answered vaguely, trying to remember. Scenes flashed before her eyes, too fast to see or make any sense, but she remembered the pain. She reached up to rub her upper arm. She could almost still feel the ache there. With it came the memories of being shoved into a cell with 2 of the Vess, being left there for days, fed when they were fed and manhandled by one of them. Not for that Vess the attitude that kids were out of bounds to them. The least of what he did was to grab her and drag her aside at feeding time until he and his partner had eaten. Then she was allowed to approach her food. Pushing herself up out of the chair, she forced herself to smile broadly at Jemmy. "Let's get started getting dinner ready." "Do you still get food regularly from Prinny? Has she had that baby yet?" "Not yet, but she reckons it'll be any day now. But she sees us right because we don't cause any trouble for her, unlike the kids on the other side of the village. Good to know she's looking out for you." She let the door bang behind her as they headed down the dim hallway to the kitchen. A small fire burned in the grate, heating the few feet of the room around the sofa and chair they were sprawled on. Except for Les, who sat on the floor by the fire, once again sharpening his knives on the ancient milestone. "That was so good," Matt said. "Wish we could eat like that every day." Cassie looked over at him. "One day we will." "One day," said Les, jerking the edge of one of his knives before putting it down to pick up the next. "It's always one day. Won't come before we're all grown and rounded up by the Vess for the work camps." "You never know," said John. "Maybe this time the ranker really has important intel." "When do we leave?" he asked Cassie. At midnight, she said, there's no moon right now, so it'll be full dark and easiest for us to sneak out of the village. We'll have to avoid vest search parties and patrols. Who are you taking? Jemmy asked, yawning hugely. I'm leaving you, Matt and Sean behind, Jemmy. We only have 2 days to get the ranker and get him out of here before the vest find him. Now go get some sleep. We leave at midnight. The kids had dragged their sleeping rolls into the main room as near to the fire as they could. Only Cassie was still awake, worrying about her mission and about those she'd be leaving behind. This was her last stop, because even with the meds she had to take, she was over the age of puberty by several years. Any time now, the sensors might detect her as an adult and deliver a killing jolt of energy rather than the faint buzz they all felt as kids. You're taking a risk with the sensors, Les said quietly as he sat up. Thought for sure they'd called you back because of that. Never expected to see you again. She hesitated, then decided to be honest with him. You wouldn't, except for this mission, she said quietly, pushing herself up on one elbow to look over at him. It's really important we get the intel this ranker is carrying. And us, what happens with me and Steph and Pete? You come with me. You're too close to adulthood yourselves to risk out here any longer. Les nodded, slipping on his knives into their sheaths in his bandolier. Good. Didn't fancy staying here till they came to colours for the work camps. The others will be okay, they're still young. With any luck, I was told it will all be over before they reach puberty. So it's personal. We got to get this ranker and get this incel stuff out of the vest territory if we want to survive. That's the gist of it, she agreed. I'll brief you once we've left. She checked her watch. Time we got up. They'd already packed the things they'd need for the 2 days in the open, so with quiet efficiency the four of them were able to grab their bedrolls and packs and make their way quietly to the rear of the house, opening the door and slipping out into the darkness. Silently in the moonless night they made their way past the sensors, making for the lightly wooded land at the rear of the village. Keeping low, they ran towards the tree line, not stopping until they were a good 50 feet into the more densely packed forest. Starlight filtered down through the occasional breaks in the tree canopy, helping them navigate their way. Cassie took advantage of a brief stop to take off her pack, then her coat, and began to pull items from the inside of the padded areas. First came the parts for a gun and bullets made of Kevlar, then several magazines for it. She pieced it together quickly and stuck it into the waistband of her jeans. A map and compass followed, and finally a small device the size of a pack of cards. This she switched on, angling it to all the compass points. Getting no response, she turned it off and stowed it in her pocket. What's that? Pete asked. Something we should know about? It's a tracker, she said. The ranker has a tracer in him, and the tracker will tell us when he's nearby. You don't know where he is? John asked in disbelief, shoving his fair hair out of his eyes. We got to find this guy too? I know roughly where he is, she said, opening the map and checking their bearings with a compass. The tracker fine-tunes his location, that's all. He'll be hiding, waiting for us. She fumbled inside her coat some more, pulling out a thin case. Some of the padding was stuck to her fingers and she shook them to dislodge it before standing up and pulling her coat back on. The case she stowed in an inner coat pocket. What's the mission? Les asked. Get the intel and get out to the pickup point? Get the intel, she said, setting off into the woods, and get him back if we can. And how do we get him past any sensors? Pete asked, trotting after her. They'll kill him for sure. I got a drug to give him once we're past the sensors, she said. It'll bring him back again, so says HQ. So they say. Has it been tested? Les demanded. Not in field conditions, she admitted. They think the sensors give a person a huge electrical shock that stops their heart, but they haven't been able to get hold of a sensor yet to test it. So we're kind of field testing this for them. So what do you do? Pete asked. It's in that case, Les said. Yeah, she said. It's a shot of epinephrine. I have to stick it in his heart to start it up again. So long as we have the intel, that's what matters most, though. The shot is to test if it works or not. Does this guy know he's kind of disposable? John asked, catching hold of a narrow tree bole as he slipped on some damp leaves. He's bound to, unless he's also some kind of dumb, Les said, ducking under a branch. Most he'll know is we have a way to revive him, Cassie said. Best not to see the problems before we need to. Now, let's stop talking in case there are any patrols out and about. Cassie pushed them hard, stopping only a couple of times to rest, drink, and to check the map. This time they hunkered down amongst the rocky outcrop, ringed by bushes. Break out your rations, she said, taking off her backpack. Mission rations, Les said, pulling out his MRE and tearing it open. No heaters. Makes sense, John said. What do you know about this ranker? He asked, alternating bites of his chicken pastry with some beef jerky. Keep your voice down, she said, stripping off her wrapper and beginning to munch on her food. There will be patrols out here and we don't want to draw their attention. His name is Lieutenant Ryan, and he was on an infiltration mission at one of the work camps. He escaped and was picked up by our side, but the Vests managed to track him and shoot his ride down. He's on the run now, trying to stay free till we can meet up with him. Where are we exiting with them? Les asked. To the east side, she said. You know the place, by the river. You've been there before. He nodded, taking a slug from his water bottle. I know it. If the coast is clear, it should be easy to get him across if the sensors don't get him. All we need is the right intel, right? Les's brown eyes regarded her unblinkingly. Right, she said. Just checking, he said, breaking eye contact. Need to know what our priorities are, if we're followed or if there's a patrol getting us, and the intel out is more important than the ranker. Just want everyone to agree, because once we're out there, no time to argue about it. You're right, she said. No time to argue. Any trouble, we leave him and run for it.